Hi there, welcome back. This is Professor Hank, and in this video we're going to go through some basic list processing in Python, some things you can do with lists. Specifically, we're going to look at 6 things really quick. We're going to talk about how you could find the average of values, or the average of values in a list. Right, so if I got a list of 10 numbers, how do I figure out what their average value is in that list? Another example of list processing we'll look at is counting items in a list, right? So maybe I want to count, how many items are in the list that are positive, or maybe how many times does 5 occur in the list, right? We'll see that you can pass lists as arguments to functions, and we'll see that you can return lists from functions. We'll look at examples of that. And we'll also see that you can save a list to a file, and we'll look at an example of that and some special considerations for dealing with that, as well as reading lists from files and some things you have to keep in mind when dealing with that. So let's look at our first example here. We'll see how we can find the sum and the average of a list, right? So to find the average, you'd have to find the sum first. So let's go ahead and create a list, which I'll just call a list, and I'll put some integers in there. 8675309, right? So we'll put that in there, and let's say that I want to find the total of all the values in that list. Okay, so what I could do is I could use a loop to pull this off, and a couple of ways I could do it. I could use a while loop, I could use a for loop. For loop is probably the easiest way of doing it. I could do something that looks like this, create an accumulator variable. Right, this is my accumulator. Okay, and I could go through with a for loop, and I could do something like this. I could say for num in a list, right? And so that'll iterate over the entire list, and 8 will get copied into num, 6 will get copied into num, and 7 will get copied into num, and so on. And for each repetition, I could just add what's copied in the target variable num to total. So total plus equals num, right? And then once that's done, you'll see I can go ahead and print out total, and you'll see that that we've got our total, which is 38. 8 plus 6 plus 7 is 21, plus 5 is 26, plus 3 is 29, plus 9 is 38. So there's your total, right? So your total for the list is total. Okay, now if I want to find the average, all I have to do is take that total and divide it by the length of the list, right? To find the average, just total divided by length, right? So I can just say average equals total divided by len of the list. Okay, so then I'll print that out and say, well, your average is average. Right, so let's go ahead and run that. So there's your average, 5.4285714. That's kind of gross. So how about we format that average to 3 decimal places? Right, so we'll do format average and 0.3f. Okay, and let me make that a little bit smaller so it'll all fit on the screen for you. And we'll format it to 3 decimal places of precision. Okay, so that's one way you can do it, using a for loop. Right, using a for loop. Now, I'll comment that out, and instead we'll use a while loop and the indexes of the list. So I could use something like this. I could say, well, let's set I equal to 0, and then I can say, well, while I is less than the length of a list, right? So that's going to be my test expression. I will be 0, then it'll be 1, then it'll be 2, then it'll be 3, then it'll be 4, right? So I is going to have each index of every single element of this list. So if 8 is index 0, 6 is index 1, 7 is index 2, and so forth, I is going to go through and um, get incremented through each repetition. So it'll start off at 0, and then it'll become 1, then it'll become 2, then it'll become, etc., right? So inside the body of the loop, we'll add to the total a list of I, right? So when I is 0, we're adding a list of 0, which will be 8 to total. When I is 1, we'll add a list of 1, which is 6 to total, right? So let's not forget to increment our I, okay? And that's what it'll look like if we use a while loop instead. So let's go ahead and run it. See that we get the exact same answer. So for loop, a little cleaner, right? Because there's less lines of code and less chance for you to have an off by one error or anything like that, where you have one too many iterations. But while loop can work as well. Okay, so let me give you another example of processing a list, right? So let's say that I wanted to write some code that would count the number of times the integer 5 appears in a list, right? So I'll go ahead and create a list, which I'll call a list, okay? And I'll just put, some more numbers in here, 8, 6, 7, 5, 3, 5, 9, okay? And I want to count how many times 5 appears in that list. So I can do something kind of similar to the previous example. So maybe I'll create a counter variable called count of 5s, right? So this is going to be counting how many 5s we have. Well, initially, we haven't counted anything yet, so it should be initialized to 0. And then I'll just use a for loop here, and I'll say, well, for some number n in a list, right, we'll go through, and if the number that's copied into n is equal to 5, because that's what we're counting, then I'll increment count of 5s by 1, right? And so once that's done, once that loop is finished, then count of 5s is going to have 2 in it, because as the loop goes through iterating, it's going to copy 8 into n. Well, this will be false in that case, so this will get skipped. 6 will get copied into n. Well, this will be false, so this will get skipped. 7 will get copied into n, false, and then skipped. Well, but when 5 is copied into n, well, then this will be true, so then count of 5s plus equals 1 will actually execute, and so then the 0 in count of 5s will be changed to 1, right? And then, and so on for the 3, and then the other 5, and then the 9. So let's go ahead and print how many 9s or how many 5s we have. You have this many 5s, right? So count of 5s. Okay, so let's run it. And so you can see you have this many 5s, 2, right? So basically when you're processing a list like this, you're just going element by element, deciding what you want to do with it. In this example, we were testing each element to see if the element was equal to 5. If I wanted to count how many times we had positive numbers, then I could just say, well, greater than 0, right? In the previous example, we were just adding everything up. Okay, you just have to decide what you want to do for each value that's in the list. Do you want to count them? Do you want to, see if they're greater than 0? What? Okay, just depends on what problem you're trying to solve. Okay, so now we can pass lists to functions as arguments, and we can return references to lists from functions. Okay, so let's say that I wanted to write a function that accepts a list of integers as its only argument and returns the average of that list, right? So basically that example we did a second ago, we'll move it into a function. Okay, so I'll go ahead and define the function, and I'll just call this average of list, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to have a parameter for the list, right? Just like it was any other variable. So I'll make that parameter L for list, okay? So when I do that, um, basically what this parameter is going to do is it's going to give me a link to the list that's passed as an argument. So I can use that parameter within the function definition to access that list argument, right? So I'll go ahead and just have a for loop like I did before. So for each number in the list argument that's been passed, what will I do? I'm going to find the average here, right? So I'll go ahead and have to have a total variable for counting up the total of everything in the list first. Okay, total plus equals n. Okay, and then once that's done, I'll compute what the average is. The average is equal to the total divided by the length of the list that was passed as an argument, and then I'll return that average. Okay, so that's my average of list function, and so then I'll create a main function to contain my mainline logic, and then I'll call it. Okay, and so in main, we'll create a list, which I'll just call some list, and I'll put some integers in it. Okay, and then I'll pass that list as an argument to my function. Okay, now that's going to return the average of some list, so I'll store that in a variable, which I'll call AOSL for average of some list, and then I'll print that out. Right, so the average of some list is AOSL. Okay, let's make sure that we have matching quotes here, and then we'll go ahead and we'll run it. Okay, so there's your average, right? Just like we had before. Now I might want to format that like I did before, so I will. Right, format AOSL to 3 decimal places of precision. Okay, and let's put that on separate lines so that way you can see all the code in one place, right? So main idea here is, look, you can pass lists as arguments to functions, okay, just like you can any other variable, and then that function can access that list through its parameter. Okay, now we can also return lists from functions, right? So how about I create a function that is going to return a list of, I don't know, zeros or something. So define create list of zeros. Right, it's going to be a little stupid function, but whatever. So what this is going to do is just go in here and create a list, which I'll just call A, and we'll put 3 zeros in there, right? So once that's done, then we'll return that list. Okay, so then I can call that function create list of zeros. Okay, and I can assign it to some variable. So some variable. Okay, and then once I've done that, I can use that list however I want to use a list, right? So in this case, I'll just print it out. But Let's see here. Oops, sorry. Create list of zeros. Create list of zeros. What did I do here? Oh, typo. There we go. There we go. So there's there's our list. 0, 0, 0. Create list of zeros was called, and inside of that function, it created a list with 3 zeros in it, returned a reference to that list, which was then stored in the sum variable, and we were able to print it, right? And you can manipulate that list however you want. Like I could, for example, just print out just one of the elements of the list. Right? I mean, once the list is created, who cares how it got created? It was created. We can use it once it's been created. So, I had a function created, fine. I could have created it inside main, fine. The point here is that you can return lists from functions. Now, what about if I wanted to, save a list of numbers, right? Of numbers. Well, you might think, well, that's going to be fine, right? That's going to be no big deal. We can just, I got a list of 3 numbers here, and I'll just use f.writeLines, and just like I did before, right? And I'll pass numbers. Okay, let's go ahead and run it and see what happens. Okay. Oops. WriteLines were raising an exception. Why? Because remember, the methods for the file object, they require that you pass strings. They work with strings, not number data types, right? So WriteLines isn't going to work for a list that has only numbers in it. So what we'll have to do instead is similar to what we just saw, where we can use that for loop to iterate over the list of numbers, and we'll use the write method, and what we'll do is for each number that gets copied into n, we'll convert it into a string, and then since we don't want everything to appear on the same line, we'll go ahead and tack that new line character on the end, just like we did with Tom, Dick, and Harry. Okay, so now when we run this, no error, because the 88 gets copied into n, we convert that 88 into a string, and then we append to the end of it the new line character. So let's go back and reopen output.txt and see what we got. And you can see there's the 88 on the first line, the 66 on the second line, and the 99 on the third line. Okay, so now let's do the opposite. Let's go ahead and read an entire list from a file using the read lines method, right? So what we'll do is we'll do the opposite. We'll read the 88, the 66, and the 99. We'll read that back into a list. So I'll go ahead and open the file again. So we'll open output.txt, this time for reading, right? And when we're done with it, we'll close it. And so what we'll do is we'll assign to a variable a what's returned by read lines, okay? And then once that's done, I'll go ahead and I'll print out the list. So read lines returns a list that has as each element a line from the file, right? So let's go ahead and run that, and you'll see what? Shouldn't that be numbers? Why is there 88 \n in single quotes? What is that? Well, what happened is that read lines returns a list of strings, right? It returns a list of strings. So that's what got stored inside of that list were 3 strings. So the string 88, new line character, the string 66, new line character, the string 99, new line character, right? So, oops, right? So if I don't want it in that format, if I actually want numbers, um, or maybe I don't want numbers, maybe I just want to keep the strings. Maybe instead of 886699, it was Tom, Dick, and Harry in there, right? And I want to keep them as strings, but I don't want the new line character as part of the string. So what can I do? Well, I'd have to do some subsequent list processing here. So what I could do is I could iterate over the list. So I could do something maybe like this. I could say I equals 0 while I less than the length of list A. What I'll do is I will assign to A of I A of I dot R strip, right? And that'll strip off trailing white space, okay? And you can specify in here what type of white space. So I want to strip off the new line character at the end. And so then once that's done, I'll print out the list again. And so that'll kind of clean up my list, my data in my list. So now, oops, got an infinite loop, almost forgot. I gotta increment my I. Let's fix that, okay. So, try it again, there we go. So, what happened is that for each element, when I was 0, then it was 1, then it was 2, what we did is we took that element and we stripped off the new line character and then took that new version of the string and overwrote the original version of that string. So now you can see that instead of 88 new line character, 66 new line character, 99 new line character, it's just the string 88, the string 66, the string 99. So, if this, instead of 88, 66, 99, it was Tom, Dick, and Harry, it'd work the exact same way. Now, you might not want a list of strings 88, 66, 99. You actually want frickin' a list of integers, right? So what do? Well, a similar kind of thing. You just go through and you convert each one of those strings to the appropriate data type. So I'll show you what that'll look like. So we'll just use a while loop again. Okay, and what we'll do is we'll overwrite the string version, the string 88, the string 66, the string 99 with the integer version of those things. Right, so we'll take the string A of I, convert it into an integer, and then we'll place it in the ith position within the list A. So grab that string that's in the ith position in list A, make make an integer copy of it, and then overwrite the string that was in the ith position in the A list. Okay, and so when that's done, print out the list, and now you'll see we cleaned our data up, and after that final while loop, our list A now has actual integers 88, 66, and 99. Okay, so before we finish up, one last thing I want to tell you, and that is that when you pass a list to a function, you're passing a reference to that list. What that means is anything you do to the parameter, you do to the argument, right? So this is similar to what is called in some other languages as pass by reference, which is supported in C and C++, for example. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here. So let me define a function called 0 out list. Okay, we'll give it a parameter. And when you pass to this function a list, what will happen is that we're going to zero out the list. Whatever was in that list is going to be replaced with all zeros. So while I is less than the length of the list, go ahead and assign to L of I 0. Okay, and when this is done, what's going to happen is the list that was passed as an argument, whatever was in it, It's going to be totally gone and replaced with zeros. Okay, so I'll go ahead and define a mainline function here, and then we'll call it. And so let me create a list of names, right? So names, Tom, Dick, and Harry, right? So let's print names, okay, and we'll test what we have so far. Okay, so you can see there's the list, strings Tom, Dick, Harry. So now I'll call the function zero out list, and I'll pass as an argument the list. And when you're passing lists as arguments, it's just the name of the list, right? That's all you're doing. So we're going to pass that, and then once that function's finished, I'll print the list out again. Right now, take a look at what the output's going to look like. Right? Oops. Let's see here. So what did I have wrong here? I had an infinite loop. So let's see. I plus equals 0. That should be plus equals 1. Sorry about that. Let's go ahead and run it again. And so you can see, there is Tom, Dick, and Harry, the original list, the result of line 14, printing out the names. I called zero out list, and what happened is that when I was assigning 0 to L of I was really assigning 0 to names of I, right? Because the list is passed as a reference to the function, so really a reference to that list. So L is referring to names. So anything that I did to L, I was actually doing to names, and so that's why you see when line 16 executes print names, you see, well, Tom, Dick, and Harry are gone. It's 0, 0, 0 now. So something to be aware of when you're passing lists to functions. All right, so before we go, let's just summarize what we talked about in the video. Showed you how to find the average value in a list, and along with that, finding the sum of the values in a list. Showed you some other quick processing examples, how you can count items in a list. We talked about passing lists to functions, and at the very end there, showed you how you can change the contents of a list from within a function. Showed you briefly an example of returning lists from functions. You can create lists inside of functions and then return a reference to them, so that the program that calls the function, or the calling code, can then access that list that was returned. Showed you how to save lists to files using the write and write lines methods, and a couple of issues there, and then showed you how to retrieve lists from files, along with a little bit of, a couple of little issues that could prop up with that, and how to fix them. Okay, so that's going to bring this video to a close. If you felt that the video was useful, please consider giving the video a thumbs up, and if you thought that the video sucked, well, then you've got that thumbs down button as an option as well. If you'd like to see more videos, if you're interested in more content from the channel, feel free to hit that subscribe button. And as usual, if you're a student of mine and you have further questions, feel free to drop me an email or to stop by my office hours. Okay, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.